The Zether invaded Earth with devastating precision, reducing cities to rubble and silencing governments within weeks. Their technology was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Shields that could withstand any weapon, armies of drones, and soldiers equipped with armor that no human military could penetrate. The few remaining human forces fought bravely, but it was clear humanity was losing. In the aftermath of the initial invasion, survivors were scattered, hiding in the ruins of what was once their civilization. The streets were patrolled by Zether enforcers, and anyone caught resisting was executed on the spot. Dr. Rachel Mathers, a scientist specializing in obscure human history and folklore, found herself among a small group of survivors in an underground bunker. Supplies were low, and hope was even lower. The Zether weren't just invaders. They were conquerors who aimed to wipe out Earth's culture, leaving nothing of human heritage behind. Their ultimate goal wasn't just domination, it was erasure. Entire libraries were burned, digital archives deleted, art destroyed. But one thing they couldn't destroy was the collective memory of humanity's myths, legends, and fears. And that was where Rachel's mind started to wander. Her colleagues, most of whom had once worked for military and research institutions, focused on futile efforts to create new weapons. But Rachel had another idea. In her research on the history of warfare, she had come across stories of humanity turning to its deepest fears in moments of desperation. One such legend stuck in her mind: Bloody Mary. It was a silly childhood story, or so most believed. Stand in front of a mirror, say her name 3 times, and she would appear. But the origins of the myth were darker, older, and more dangerous than most realized. Tales from medieval times spoke of a vengeful spirit, a woman wronged who sought revenge on anyone who dared summon her. To Rachel, it didn't matter if the story was real or not. In their current situation, they had nothing to lose. Late one night, as the group sat around the dimly lit bunker, Rachel brought up the legend. "What if there's another way to fight back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her words were met with skeptical stares. She explained the legend of Bloody Mary, how summoning her could unleash a force that might just be strong enough to turn the tide against the Zether. "Are you seriously suggesting we summon a ghost?" one of the soldiers, a gruff man named Jenkins, asked, incredulous. "Not a ghost. A force. A power older than anything we understand," Rachel replied, her eyes sharp with determination. "We've tried everything else. Conventional weapons, guerrilla tactics, they don't work. The Zether are too strong. But what if we could summon something that terrifies even us? What if fear is the weapon we need?" The bunker fell into an uneasy silence. Everyone knew they were out of options. They could either die slowly under the Zether's rule, or they could try something, anything, that might give them a chance to fight back. After a long pause, Jenkins finally spoke, his voice resigned. "Fine. What do we need to do?" Rachel outlined the ritual, her knowledge of ancient texts and folklore guiding her instructions. The group gathered candles, mirrors, and a few relics they had scavenged from the ruins of a museum. It was all symbolic, of course. There was no real proof any of it would work. But in the face of annihilation, symbols had power. The ritual would be performed at midnight, in the heart of what used to be a city center, where the Zether rarely patrolled. The night of the summoning was cold and silent. The group moved cautiously through the dark streets, avoiding drone patrols as they made their way to an abandoned skyscraper. The once grand lobby was now filled with debris and broken glass, the perfect setting for what felt like humanity's last stand. Rachel set up the mirrors in a circle, the candles flickering in the still air. She instructed the group to stand in silence, focusing on the task at hand. They were to call out her name in unison, 3 times. As the final candle was lit, Rachel stepped in front of the largest mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. "Bloody Mary," she whispered. Nothing. The air was thick with tension. "Bloody Mary," she said again, louder this time. Still nothing. She took a deep breath and shouted the name one last time. "Bloody Mary!" The air in the room seemed to change, growing colder, heavier. The candles flickered wildly, and the mirrors reflected shadows that didn't belong to anyone in the room. A low, eerie whisper filled the space, echoing off the walls. The group huddled together, fear settling in their bones. Then, from the largest mirror, a figure began to emerge. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, her long, dark hair hanging wet over her face. Her eyes, deep and hollow, locked onto Rachel with a gaze that seemed to pierce her soul. This was no mere spirit. This was something far more dangerous. "You called for me?" Bloody Mary's voice was cold, cutting through the silence like a blade. No one spoke, too terrified to respond. Rachel finally found her voice. "We need your help," she said, her words shaky. "The Zether, they've taken over. We can't stop them. We need a weapon." Bloody Mary smiled, a twisted grin that sent a chill down Rachel's spine. "A weapon, you say?" she hissed. "I can give you what you want. But there is always a price." The group exchanged uneasy glances, realizing too late that they might have unleashed something far worse than the Zether. The air in the room felt suffocating, as if it had been drained of all warmth and light. Bloody Mary stood there, her presence filling the space with an unnatural coldness. Her smile was unsettling, a mixture of malice and amusement. The survivors, though terrified, had no choice but to proceed. They had come this far, turning back wasn't an option. Rachel, taking a deep breath to steady herself, stepped forward. "What do you want in return?" she asked, her voice steady but betraying the fear she felt deep inside. Mary's eyes gleamed, reflecting the flickering candlelight. "Blood," she said, her voice like ice. "The blood of those who summoned me. For every victory I grant you, a life must be given. I am not a merciful spirit. I am vengeance, and vengeance is always paid in blood." The group stood frozen, the weight of her words sinking in. The reality of their situation had become starkly clear. Bloody Mary wasn't a savior, she was a force of destruction, and her demands were as brutal as her methods. Jenkins, who had been silent until now, clenched his fists. "And if we refuse?" he asked, his tone defiant but tinged with fear. Mary's smile widened, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. "Refuse, and I leave you to the Zether. They will do worse than take your blood, they will take your very souls." She stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking prey. "But if you accept, I will make the invaders suffer. They will tremble at the sight of me. Their blood will spill first, but yours will follow." Rachel knew there was no other choice. The Zether had already brought humanity to its knees. Without Mary, they were doomed. With her, they had a chance, though at a terrible cost. She nodded, her decision made. "We accept," Rachel said quietly, her voice breaking the heavy silence. Mary's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, Rachel felt as if her very soul was being scrutinized. Then, with a sudden gust of wind, the candles blew out, and darkness enveloped the room. The group tensed, waiting for something to happen, but Mary's voice cut through the blackness. "Then let the slaughter begin." The first strike came that very night. The Zether patrol, confident and unaware of any new threat, moved through the empty streets as they always did. But this time, something followed them. Something unseen, something terrifying. Mary moved through the shadows, her form shifting between solid and ethereal, her laughter echoing in the night. The Zether, who had faced every human weapon without fear, suddenly found themselves gripped by a terror they couldn't understand. One by one, the Zether soldiers fell. Mary tore through them like they were nothing, her hands slicing through their armor as if it were paper. Their screams filled the air, a sound that sent shivers down the spines of the hidden humans who watched from the safety of their bunkers. The Zether, once invincible, were no match for her. She was not bound by the laws of physics or biology. She was a force of pure, vengeful power. By dawn, the streets were littered with the bodies of the fallen invaders. But the cost of their victory was clear. As the group gathered to witness the aftermath, Mary appeared once again, her hands stained with the blood of their enemies. Her gaze turned to Rachel. "The first payment is due," she said, her voice a soft, sinister whisper. Rachel hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known this moment was coming, but facing it now was different. The group looked at each other, the realization of what had to be done weighing heavily on them. One of them had to die. Jenkins stepped forward, his expression grim. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. "I knew what I was signing up for. If this is what it takes to win, then so be it." Before anyone could protest, Mary's hand shot out, and with a single swift motion, Jenkins crumpled to the ground, his life drained in an instant. The group stood in shock, unable to move or speak. Mary's smile returned, satisfied with her offering. "Remember," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "for every victory, a price must be paid." And then she vanished, leaving the survivors alone with the body of their fallen comrade. The group, though shaken, knew they couldn't stop now. Jenkins had made his choice, and they would have to honor it by continuing the fight. But as they moved forward, the weight of their pact with Bloody Mary hung heavy over them. They had gained a powerful weapon, but at what cost? Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Mary struck with brutal efficiency, taking down Zether patrols, destroying their outposts, and spreading fear among their ranks. The invaders, once confident in their superiority, were now on edge, unsure of how to combat this new threat. Their technology, which had proven so effective against human forces, was useless against a being like Mary. But with each victory, Mary's demands grew. Another life, another sacrifice. The survivors began to wonder how long they could keep this up. How many more of them would have to die before the Zether were defeated? And what would happen when there were no more lives left to give? Rachel, burdened by the weight of her decision, began to doubt herself. She had unleashed something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. Mary's power was growing, and with it, her influence over the world. Strange occurrences began to happen, unnatural storms, unexplained deaths, and an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to hang in the air. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being warped by her presence. But despite the growing fear, the survivors couldn't stop. The Zether were still a threat, and Mary was their only weapon. With each battle, they inched closer to victory, but the price they paid grew steeper with every passing day. And through it all, Bloody Mary watched, waiting, her hunger for blood never satisfied. Mary's attacks on the Zether continued relentlessly, her methods growing more brutal with each passing day. The once confident alien invaders now moved cautiously, their superior technology rendered useless against her supernatural powers. Fear had taken root among the Zether. Their soldiers, previously fearless and methodical, now hesitated, their every move shadowed by the knowledge that death could come for them without warning. But while Mary's onslaught was terrifying to the invaders, it was equally horrifying to the humans who had summoned her. Each victory came with a cost, and the survivors knew that for every fallen alien, a human life would soon be demanded. The group, dwindling in numbers, had no choice but to continue their grim march toward freedom, haunted by the price they were paying. Rachel felt the weight of every life lost. The faces of her fallen comrades stayed with her, their deaths echoing the responsibility she carried for summoning Mary in the first place. She had hoped for a weapon, a way to turn the tide against the Zether, but what she had unleashed was something far more dangerous, something they couldn't control. And now, it was too late to stop. As Mary's power grew, so did her influence over the world around her. The air itself seemed to thicken with dread wherever she struck. Her presence altered the landscape, twisting reality in small but unnerving ways. The humans noticed it first, reflections in mirrors that didn't match reality, shadows moving where there should be none, and whispers in the dead of night that seemed to come from nowhere. Mary was becoming more than a weapon. She was becoming a part of the world itself. The Zether, desperate to combat this new threat, began studying the nature of Mary's power. They had underestimated humanity, not in its military might, but in its cultural and mythological depths. The aliens, with all their advanced knowledge, had no understanding of the supernatural forces they now faced. But they were not without their own strategies. Reports began to filter through the survivors that the Zether were focusing on capturing humans, not to kill, but to study. They sought to understand the connection between Bloody Mary and her summoners, to find a way to sever the bond or manipulate it for their own ends. This new tactic brought an additional layer of terror. It wasn't just about fighting the invaders anymore. Now they had to protect themselves from being used against their own weapon. Despite the Zether's efforts, Mary continued her campaign of destruction. Every Zether outpost she targeted was obliterated, their soldiers torn apart or driven mad by her. But with each attack, the strain on the human survivors grew heavier. They were running out of people to sacrifice, and the tension within the group was reaching a breaking point. Rachel's nightmares had become more vivid, more terrifying. She could feel Mary's presence even when she wasn't around. It was as if their fates were now intertwined, and Rachel couldn't escape the growing sense that, in summoning Mary, she had tied her own life to the vengeful spirit. The others began to notice Rachel's exhaustion, her growing detachment, but no one dared question her. She was the only one who seemed to have a connection to Mary, and they needed her to keep guiding them, no matter the toll it was taking. The group's discussions grew more desperate. Some began to question whether they should continue with the sacrifices. Was victory over the Zether worth losing their humanity? Others argued that they had no choice. They had come too far, and stopping now would mean total annihilation at the hands of the invaders. The Zether were still a formidable force, and without Mary, there would be no hope of survival. The breaking point came when Mary demanded a sacrifice that the group wasn't prepared for. Instead of asking for the life of one of the remaining survivors, she set her sights on someone outside the group, someone innocent. It was a child, one of the few left hidden in the remnants of a city, far away from the direct conflict. The group was horrified. This was too far, even for them. Sacrificing one of their own in the heat of battle was one thing, but this? This was murder. Rachel tried to reason with Mary, to find another way, but the spirit's response was cold and unyielding. "A life for a life," she said. "It is the only currency I accept." The group was paralyzed by indecision. Refusing Mary's demand would mean losing her protection, and without her, the Zether would surely find and destroy them. But going through with the sacrifice would mean they had lost whatever shred of humanity they had left. It was an impossible choice. Rachel, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders, knew that they were on the edge of something terrible. Mary's demands were growing more twisted, more cruel, and Rachel feared that if they continued down this path, there would be no turning back. They would become just as monstrous as the Zether. In the end, it wasn't Rachel who made the decision. One of the group members, a man who had lost everything and was driven by a desire for revenge, took matters into his own hands. He believed that the end justified the means, and without consulting the others, he carried out the sacrifice. When the rest of the group found out, it was too late. Mary had been appeased, and she returned with even more power than before. But the act had shattered what little trust remained among the survivors. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The group was fractured, divided between those who still believed they could win and those who had lost all hope. Rachel, consumed by guilt and despair, could feel herself slipping further away. Mary's influence was growing stronger, not just in the world around them, but in Rachel's own mind. She could feel Mary watching her, waiting for the next sacrifice, the next battle. The Zether were still out there, still fighting, but now, Rachel wasn't sure who the real enemy was anymore. Was it the Zether? Or was it Bloody Mary herself? The line between ally and adversary was blurring, and Rachel feared that soon, there would be no distinction left at all. Mary's power had become undeniable. The Zether were no longer the hunters. They were now prey, constantly on the run, trying to avoid the wrath of a force they couldn't comprehend. They deployed all their remaining strength, threw every strategy they had at her, but it was like fighting a storm, chaotic, unstoppable, and far beyond their understanding. Mary cut through their forces with terrifying efficiency, leaving nothing but destruction in her wake. But the toll on humanity was growing unbearable. The sacrifices demanded by Mary were becoming more frequent, more cruel, and the survivors knew they were running out of time. They had started with hope that her power would free them, but now, that hope was slipping away, replaced by dread. The survivors weren't just fighting to save their world from the Zether anymore, they were fighting to save it from Mary herself. Rachel had become the de facto leader of what was left of the resistance, but she felt more like a puppet on a string, with Mary pulling the strings tighter with every passing day. The nightmares she had been having were now constant, vivid, and unrelenting. She couldn't shake the feeling that Mary wasn't just a weapon they had summoned, she was something far worse, something ancient and unstoppable. And as much as Rachel wanted to deny it, she felt connected to Mary in a way that frightened her. It was as if the ritual had bound them together, and every day she could feel Mary's grip on her mind tightening. Then came the final blow. News spread that the Zether were planning a last stand. They had consolidated their forces at their largest stronghold, deep within the remnants of what used to be Earth's most powerful city. It was heavily fortified, protected by layers of alien technology that Mary hadn't yet breached. It was clear that the Zether had decided that if they were going to lose, they were going to make humanity pay dearly for it. Rachel knew this was it, the final battle. They could either crush the Zether once and for all or risk being completely annihilated. But the group wasn't united anymore. Some of the survivors, those who had been with her from the beginning, were still determined to finish what they started. Others, though, had begun to question whether victory was worth the cost. Was there even anything left to win? The moral weight of the situation bore down on Rachel harder than ever. If they went ahead with Mary's plan to attack the stronghold, there would be more sacrifices. More blood would be demanded, and she wasn't sure she could keep paying that price. She had tried reasoning with Mary before, and it had always been in vain. The spirit had no compassion, no sense of morality, only hunger. As the group prepared for the final assault, Rachel found herself alone, staring into one of the mirrors they had used during the ritual. She could feel Mary's presence, stronger than ever. She didn't need to say anything aloud. Mary already knew what was on her mind. "You hesitate." Mary's voice echoed in Rachel's mind, as sharp and cold as ever. "You fear the price. But I warned you from the beginning, there is no victory without sacrifice." Rachel didn't respond. She knew what Mary was going to say, and yet, she still didn't want to hear it. "Do you think the Zether will spare you?" Mary continued. "Do you think they will show mercy when they find you cowering in the ruins of your world?" "No, Rachel. There is only one path. My path." But Rachel wasn't so sure anymore. She had seen firsthand what Mary could do, and now, standing on the brink of humanity's final victory, she began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. If they went through with this, if they let Mary finish the job, would there be anything left of humanity worth saving? The final battle began at dawn. Mary descended upon the Zether stronghold like a force of nature, tearing through their defenses with ease. Their advanced technology, which had once seemed so invincible, was nothing more than a minor inconvenience to her now. The Zether fought with everything they had left, but it wasn't enough. They had underestimated the destructive power of fear, and now they were paying the price. The humans watched from a distance, witnessing the carnage unfold. Rachel stood with them, her mind racing. This was the moment they had been fighting for, the moment they had sacrificed so much to achieve. But as she watched the Zether fall, one by one, she felt no triumph. All she felt was dread. Mary had become too powerful. The destruction she wrought was total, and as she laid waste to the Zether, Rachel realized something horrifying. Mary wasn't going to stop. The more power she gained, the more she craved. And once the Zether were gone, who would be next? As the battle reached its peak, Rachel made a decision. She had to stop Mary. Somehow, she had to break the bond that had been created when they summoned her. It was the only way to ensure that humanity had a future, one not ruled by fear and blood. With a small group of the remaining survivors, Rachel broke away from the battle, heading to the ruins of the building where they had first performed the ritual. She knew what she had to do, reverse the summoning. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance they had. The ritual began just as the sun started to set. The same steps were followed, but this time, instead of calling out Mary's name, they sought to banish her. The air grew heavy, thick with tension. Rachel could feel Mary's presence, angry, resisting. But she pushed through, determined to break free from the grip of the spirit they had unleashed. For what felt like hours, they chanted, the air around them growing colder with each word. And then, finally, something changed. The oppressive feeling that had been hanging over them lifted, just slightly. The mirror, the one through which Mary had first emerged, began to crack. The air around them seemed to shift, as if reality itself was realigning. Rachel's heart raced. It was working. But just as the mirror began to shatter completely, Mary appeared before them, furious. Her form was more terrifying than ever, her eyes glowing with rage. "You think you can send me back?" she hissed. "You dare defy me now, after everything?" Rachel didn't falter. She kept chanting, her voice rising above Mary's threats. The survivors joined in, their voices growing stronger, determined to see this through. And then, with a deafening crack, the mirror exploded, and Mary's form vanished. The cold, oppressive weight that had been pressing down on them disappeared. It was over. Rachel collapsed, exhausted, but relieved. They had done it. They had broken the bond. The Zether were gone. Mary was gone. And humanity, scarred and battered, was free once again. But the cost had been immense, and Rachel knew that while the battle was over, the struggle to rebuild was only beginning.